Good morning. I'm Jenna Ben-Yehuda, Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to today's discussion, Truth and Trust in the AI Supply Chain. For those joining us via live stream, welcome as well. It's wonderful to have you here with us. I'm especially really just so excited to introduce our distinguished speakers for today, Kemba Walden, Atlantic Council Board Director and President of Paladin Global Institute, Sarah Myers West, who is Co-Executive Director of the AI Now Institute, and Jayshree Ulal, Chief Executive Officer and Chairperson of Arista Networks, who will be joining us virtually later in the discussion. And then today's conversation will be moderated by Trey Herr, Senior Director of the Cyber Statecraft Initiative at the Council, and is hosted by the Atlantic Council's AC Technology Programs, AC Tech. AC Tech is comprised of 5 existing efforts: the Cyber Statecraft Initiative, the Digital Forensic Research Lab, DFRL Lab, the Geotech Center, and our Democracy and Tech Initiative and the Capacity Building Initiative. These programs work together to address the geopolitical implications of technology and provide policymakers and global stakeholders necessary research, insights, and convenings to address challenges around global technology and ensure its responsible advancement. At the Atlantic Council, we commit to initiatives that endure, efforts that build momentum, strengthen relationships, and deliver real impact over time. And today's gathering is exactly that kind of moment, the launch event of our new series on artificial intelligence. This event marks the official unveiling of the AI Cross AX initiative, including its new logo, banner, and dedicated webpage, a visible signal of the Council's long-term commitment to really exploring the foundations of trust in AI. AI Cross AC is a coordinated effort of the Atlantic Council's 16 geographical and functional programs and centers. AI is no longer a future abstraction. It is becoming deeply embedded in how our economies function, how our governments operate, and how our societies communicate. It is reshaping not only what is technologically possible, but also how power, trust, and responsibility are distributed across industries, institutions, and nations. But why start here with the AI supply chain? Because the question of trust sits at the very center of the AI debate. Trust in data, trust in models, trust in semiconductors, data centers, capital, talent. When we talk about trust in AI, we often jump straight to the algorithms and outputs. But trust is built much earlier in the process across the supply chain of this data, models, semiconductors, centers, talent, and capital, et cetera. And each of these links creates extraordinary opportunities for innovation, but also points of vulnerability that adversaries could and do exploit. So understanding how to measure, communicate, and govern trust in this ecosystem is the challenge before us. If AI is to be harnessed responsibly, its foundations must be secure, transparent, and resilient. This series, beginning today, is designed to put those questions at the forefront of the global policy agenda. In the months ahead, we will convene leaders from government, industry, and civil society, and we will publish sharp analysis and build the networks of trust and collaboration that this moment demands. The high-level vanguard of the AI work at AC is the Atlantic Council's Commission on Artificial Intelligence. This commission will bring together top leaders on how AI is transforming global power and competition. The commission will include a high-level group of U.S. congressional co-chairs, industry pioneers, and civil society experts. The commission will anchor its work in a novel strategic framework that maps the interdependent layers of the AI technology stack against critical geopolitical factors to generate a shared approach to risk, opportunity, and which leverages points across the AI ecosystem. Guided by this framework, the Commission will drive action in 6 areas of focus: securing AI supply chains, aligning energy infrastructure with AI demands, strengthening human capital, accelerating the innovation timeline, government's use of and oversight of AI, and reinforcing cooperation with allies and partners to compete effectively. As a part of this broader effort, the Council has also undertaken a project investing in and governing a trustworthy AI supply chain, which examines the infrastructure and data components that are critical to AI and the ways governments and the private sector can work together to ensure their trustworthiness. The first report of this project, Securing the Data in the AI Supply Chain Towards a Comprehensive View of Protecting AI Data Companies, by non-resident senior fellow of our Cyber Statecraft Initiative, Justin Sherman, was released just yesterday. I think we can do signed copies, possibly. It focuses on one of the most critical elements of the AI supply chain, data. By mapping AI data components, training data, model weights, APIs, and SDKs against different risk types and threat actors, it really provides a comprehensive framework for understanding just where vulnerabilities lie and how to mitigate them. Just as the Council has done in other areas, from transatlantic security to energy resilience to digital freedom, we're committed to sustained engagement that informs decisions and shapes outcomes. And that is why today's event really matters so much. It sets the tone for the long-term effort to help policymakers, innovators, and citizens to navigate the opportunities and risks of artificial intelligence. This conversation is a step forward in a sustained Atlantic Council effort to explore AI geopolitics, illuminate points of vulnerability, and foster cooperation across governments, industry, and civil society. We could not ask for a more experienced group of leaders to guide us through these big questions. Their perspectives spanning government, civil society, and industry will help to illuminate both the challenges and the many opportunities we face as AI continues to transform the global landscape. So, thank you for being here at the start of this important journey. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to our moderator, Trey Herr. Trey?
Thank you very much, Jenna. Thank you to everybody who's joining us in person and online. My name is Trey Herr. I run the Cyber Statecraft Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. Why are we talking about AI? I'm sure someone has read about it in the last few weeks. It's been somewhere in the newspaper. One of the things that Jenna said, and I think is the motivating sort of force for this conversation, is we don't really know how to trust most of the technologies that we already use. And we are grappling with a class of technology that threatens to have sort of broad social and political effects. We've already seen it have tremendous and transformative economic effects. And our question of how do we trust and in what do we trust is now magnified beyond just a wearable like a Fitbit or your laptop or your cloud email server. And so what we're going to get into in the discussion today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Kemba Walden and Sarah Myers-West for this, as well as Jay Sriulal later today, is a discussion of what trust actually means and an evaluation of what it is that we know to be true that maybe ain't so, and what it is that we need to be thinking about as a policy community as we approach these topics. I do want to say, too, that this is a first time, I think, that we've had both Kemba and Sarah Myers-West on stage with us. And I'm excited, not just because Kemba is co-chair of the Geotech Commission that Jenna mentioned, but Sarah Myers-West and the AI Now Institute's team's work has been, for us, foundational in pushing at some of these assumptions and evaluating why it is that we think these models will behave the way we do, why we think the trust is going to be structured the way we do. And so I'm excited to get into that discussion with you both today. With that, let me start with this. What's the biggest lie that we, the policy community or industry, tell ourselves about trust in technology? Why don't we start with Kemba, and we'll come to Sarah Myers-West.
Oh, you started with a softball.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for setting up the commission. I'm honored to be able to chair it, or to co-chair it. I think one of the primary reasons is because we have a fundamental misunderstanding that technology, how the technology works, what the elements are in the technology, and we have a misunderstanding that technology is somehow agnostic of human value. Everything that we build, we're a part of the technology, we built it, carries with it the values that we bring with it. I think that's why we have such a tension with trust. We also think of technology as something that has that's cabined, that has a beginning and an end, right? Our digital infrastructure is global. It doesn't stop at borders. There is a stack of technology that communicates across layers, and we don't have a fundamental understanding early on as kids, as educators, as users, as builders of the values that are imported into the technology and how the technology works. I think that has a negative impact on trust.
Sarah.
So I would generally really agree with everything that Kemba just said and add a little bit to it. I think one is that sometimes we think of trust as something that can be architected, that it can be addressed through sort of the way that technology is built, rather than thinking about it as something that is a process that's systemic, that is, something that exists in between different actors rather than in a single actor. So thinking about it, particularly when we're talking about technologies that are largely commercial, as is the case with AI, we need to be thinking about what does the business model incentivize in the behavior of companies? At AI Now, the lens that we bring to a lot of our work is looking at the political economy. So thinking through what is the regulatory landscape as well as the market landscape that's shaping the behavior of particular actors in certain ways. So I think that's one place to dial in on. Second, I think particularly in AI, these are systems that, by and large, are probabilistic. They're not deterministic. And what that means is that there isn't going to be a clear path to say, if you build it in this way, it's going to behave in this other way. It's much harder to be able to anticipate or predict outcomes of like the way that a model is being built and deployed in the world. And I think that fundamentally needs to change the way that we think about trust in these systems, and most importantly, needs to be brought into the use cases in which these systems are being deployed. And I think that's one of the places that I'd especially like to see us all dial in on. Is this the right technology to put to particular uses, given the way that the systems are fundamentally probabilistic? You can't quite determine the way that they're going to produce certain outputs.
I like this common thread of agency in both cases, right? Like, we imbue technology with our own, as designers, as users, we have a role in how trust is architected, but also we can't set it and forget it, right? It's an ongoing, it's an active process. Kemba, with, I think, the partnership with you and the Paladin Global Institute, we've been able to put these two initial papers in the water thinking about data in this supply chain and computing infrastructure in this supply chain. I'm curious for you and the work that you and the team done, the tech stack graphic that you all have come up with, which I think has proven really useful for people to understand just the basic relationship between these layers. Across all these links in the supply chain, from training data to APIs to models, there's all kinds of opportunities to create vulnerabilities. For you and for how you're thinking about this ecosystem as someone who's been in the big chair, right, as the National Cyber Director having to own these responsibilities, where do you see the greatest risk of exploitation or disruption across this supply chain? Are we looking in the right places? Are we thinking about this sort of priority queue in the right way, or is there something different that we should be doing?
So first, let me describe the AI tech stack that, in case anybody hasn't seen it, the way we've conceived of it. We conceive of it so that policymakers can understand what it is they're trying to contend with. It's not meant for technologists, though technologists provided input into the AI tech stack, and it starts from the bottom and moves up, sort of like the OSI stack does. So it's data, and then model, infrastructure, application, and then governance. And in my view, data is where we have the most vulnerabilities. We need to contend with all of it, but data is a great place to start. And then across data and the diversity of the data sources, we have data that is inputted into the system. We have data that's external to the system. We have agentic AI, which includes LLMs, and it also includes external data, and it outputs data. It includes memory. So there's a lot of source there. There's a lot of space there for vulnerability. And I think I'm an old cyber hammer, right? So I think of things in those ways. So I'm thinking of threats and attacks like a SQL injection could take place more readily in that data layer even now. We still haven't found a foolproof solution to SQL injections. We haven't found a solution yet fully to contend with data leakage. We don't have or data manipulation through prompt injection, right? Which is sort of a space between data and model. It's a green field out there for the attacker to gain advantage if they so choose. And it's so diverse and it crosses jurisdictions that we don't have a harmonized system for thinking about it. So in my view, we need to understand what are the threats and what are the vulnerabilities together that equates to risk, and what are the solutions available for mitigating some of that risk. We don't get that down to zero, but we can mitigate. And how do we do that in a harmonized way, looking at this as a system, and rather than as just like API or data for training data for LLMs or whatever it is. It's a system, and we need to look at it that way.
I like that answer. I think in part because we tend to focus, to your point, so much on the chip, the data center, right? These individual components. But the other thing that strikes me as you're talking about data is the number of stakeholders here is vastly larger than what we're talking about hardware, right? The number of people producing, using, consuming, modifying is orders of magnitude greater. And so we're in some ways trying to solve the easy problem if it's just about trust in chips, right? We're sort of ignoring the more complicated space. How that trust gets defined, Sarah, I want to come to you on this, I think is sort of is the beginning of our crucial process here. So we have trust could mean technical robustness, could mean transparency, could mean clear articulation of labor rights. You can trust the organization, you can trust its mission and accountability. How do you define trust in this context? And as you're thinking about trust, and Kemba, I want to come to you on this as well, what should be the non-negotiable principles?
So I would almost flip it on its head and say that we should be operating from a position of zero trust. That we should be, operating from a principle that we don't sort of have any expectation that any single actor is going to be vested with responsibilities without some sort of other friction that works against them to ensure that there's accountability. I think data is a really good example to talk through here because it's also one of the places that is the most opaque. Companies that are producing research on AI, mostly this is happening within corporate labs, have given less and less information on the sources of data that they're building systems on the methods that are used to process that data. There is also an underlying labor supply chain involved in data labeling or tagging or making sense of that data, making that data, prepared for consumption or prepared for model training. That's another place where, the vulnerability can be introduced. So I think ensuring that there is friction across the actors that are involved in the preparation of data, and then bringing that same sort of principle of zero trust, introducing sufficient friction across all layers of the stack is the way that I would approach this.
Okay, so an adversarial process baked in, at least to contest the assumptions or the responsibilities.
Right, so trust becomes the outcome of a system that has built on not sort of trusting any individual actor.
Kemba, what about you? What would you feel like would be a non-negotiable principle as we're thinking about how we define trust or require trust in this space?
I 100% agree, and I think I'll just shape it a little differently, the same answer a little differently. I think transparency is a non-negotiable, if I had to put it in one word. If we could understand the sources of data, where it's coming from, whose data is, who's responsible for it, who's accountable for it, what are the outputs, what do we do with the memory, but having that transparency is key, and this is why. The point is to innovate, to use, to proliferate in a positive way, the use of AI. To do that, we need to protect that ability to innovate. Give an example. I was thinking about this, like, sort of how do we do transparency in other fields? We develop registries, for example. So if you want to be a broker-dealer to trade securities, you have to register, right? And this is not a one-to-one comparison, but that enables capital markets to thrive. So that you're registered with the SEC, that people can trust that you are a broker that's capable and responsible and accountable. There is a way to hold you accountable, and you can trade and you can improve the market, right? So that kind of transparency is what builds trust in our financial markets, one element of it. That kind of transparency is something that we can imagine in this space. So if I had to put it in one word, you didn't ask me for one word, but if I had to put it in one word, it would be transparency.
I like that interaction though too, because I think to your point with this process of contestation, it's useful to know who the players are, right? I can't really challenge your behavior. I can't hold you accountable if I don't even know that you're part of that supply chain. And again, given how complex this is, a registry is a really interesting, fairly basic, straightforward approach to do this, where we do have, right, FINRA and some of these existing models in the financial sector. Let me ask you guys both this actually. One of the things that comes up in AI regularly is it's all new, it's all exciting, it's all changing so fast, et cetera, and so forth. If you had to ballpark the number of problems that you're working on with respect to AI that are entirely novel, if you were to say, okay, the percentage of things I'm looking at have never been dealt with before, there's no previous role where I've looked at any version of this, what do you think that percentage would be? What are the entirely novel problems? Maybe Sarah, and then come back to Kemba.
I really can't think of one, and really that's because, you know, AI as it exists today, which to be clear is not the only version of building AI. It has a 70-year history. That term has meant many different things. It evolved out of, you know, evolutions within the tech industry itself. Like it's not for nothing that, you know, the tech companies amassed big pools of data to train AI models. They reached a certain sort of threshold with having the computational infrastructure to process that data. Their labs sort of arrived on particular ways of building models. Like this is an evolution of a history within the tech industry. So of course nothing's going to be, you know, completely new under the sun. I think what is new is the societal conversation that we're having about the role that AI is going to play in the world around us. And there, I think, what you were talking about earlier, it's really important to retain agency and to think of this as something where we have tremendous scope to shape that future. We don't treat it as something that's, you know, new or novel, but is actually something where we can learn from our past experience of regulating different industries and bring everything that we've learned to, you know, decision making around AI.
Yeah, Kemba, curious on you.
From the perspective of policymaking or practicing law, some of the soft sciences, it's the speed of evolution of this technology that seems to be novel to me. Not the fact that AI exists or that it's been a part of our digital ecosystem, but this, once it became accessible to everybody, the speed of evolution of how it's been adopted and where it's been adopted is something new to contend with. How do we teach our kids, right? How to prompt engineering or linear math or computational math, things that I didn't think as a policymaker I needed to learn again, down to how do we think about the labor market now in a way, because it's going to be reshaped what effectively feels like now as a policymaker, right? Maybe in a year or 2 years. But like the speed of evolution of the adoption of AI technology, they think is novel rather than the technology itself.
That's helpful, I think, again, because we hear this is new and it's so challenging, so we don't necessarily have to throw out every playbook, throw out every bit of lived experience we've had. The urgency, though, is interesting. What it is that we're being urgent toward or for. So I want to come to you on this. One of the underlying sort of myths that we hear repeated a lot at the Atlantic Council is that the ultimate end goal of AI is artificial general intelligence, and that the race is on to create something that is sort of self-learning, self-teaching, and will scale exponentially to create capabilities humans could never reach. If, taking aside the possibility that this could exist, would exist with the current technology stack, and there's obviously great debate about that, what's lost in that race, that sort of headlong rush to this AGI capability? And do you feel like there's a useful concept or construct in policy conversations about how to balance this long-term potential with near-term need and even medium-term challenges?
So I think it's really important not to forego, you know, attention to decision making in the immediate term for the sake of the long term. So artificial general intelligence as a construct is something that doesn't have an agreed upon definition within the research community. It's meant, you know, if you look at, for example, the agreement between OpenAI and Microsoft. It was hinged on the profit of the company. And that definition also changed. There not only isn't consensus around what AGI is, there also isn't consensus around whether the current paradigms will ever reach AGI. I think there was a study that was done last year that surveyed AI professionals and found that I think something like 76% agreed that there was not going to be progress within their lifetime toward AGI under the current approach to building AI. So if policymakers are sort of hinging significant decision-making on pursuit of AGI and foregoing other near-term concerns. For example, I've heard sort of hand-waving around, we don't have to worry about investing in cancer research because AGI is going to cure cancer. We don't have to worry about environmental harms because AGI will help us solve that problem. That seems to me to be a tremendously risky and frankly irresponsible bet to place, to forego resourcing and attention and appropriate policy making around very significant social domains that impact people's lives for the sake of this one end goal of pursuit of AGI.
That's interesting. So what's lost is not just the sort of on the AI and the technology side. There are broader social implications, health implications, policy implications.
Absolutely.
Kent, but let me ask you, the other place we see the AGI sort of idea come up is in conversation about China. Mm-hmm. And we've lived through debates about trust in technology relative to China before. I'm curious for you, because you have been in these situations, right? You've actually made policy into this context. How does this set of challenges differ from the debates over Huawei and 5G? What do we have to learn from that space, and what do we need to make sure we don't take forward as part of this metaphor?
And so I'll add not just Huawei and 5G, but Kaspersky is something I lived through too. The challenge that we had then, and we've learned from then, is that we took a corporate sort of hammer to Huawei, to Kaspersky. It was sort of this company is a threat actor, this supplier, whatever it is, we're going to ban, name it, right? Huawei, ZTE, et cetera. That is not a risk-informed or a supply chain risk-informed approach. I think we're in a period at this moment, right at this moment, and not a moment later, to develop a risk-informed approach to the supply chain around AI through that tech stack that I described a little while ago, so that we're not playing whack-a-mole in the future. We found ourselves playing whack-a-mole, and I think that's the difference. And the 5G piece, the lesson learned there is that we automatically thought that interoperability was going to be the key to making sure that we have a secure supply chain in 5G. What we've learned is that as 5G is deployed across the world in competition with China, China is able to provide the full stack for 5G and managed services to places that are trying to simply provide internet service and broadband service to their constituents. The interoperability piece is kind of expensive and not necessarily easily deployable, though arguably more secure. And so we have to think through that. That's the lesson I learned in the 5G context. I know this is a simplistic answer, but generally speaking, the difference today is that today we can start with a risk-informed approach to secure supply chains in the AI system.
I mean, it's a lot of what we're talking about here, right? You both have mentioned the word system a dozen times. It is not something we can call one piece out and say, okay, trust this or don't trust that. So I like that idea of risk. We have to account for some amount of uncertainty of what could happen, right, or what the likelihood of an event is. We've had, I think, a couple conversations, Kemba, talking through this on the importance of sort of collaboration between government and industry. We have a very different looking spate of industry here than we've had in digital technology before. I think, Sarah, to your point, a lot more of the research community, more open source activity. Like there's a lot of diversity in this set For you, and from the experience that you've had, what does an effective public-private partnership with respect, trust in AI and security in the supply chain look like? What's a pitfall or a sort of, that sounds nice, but it never really works out that way, to avoid?
So I think, especially in this case, public-private partnership is a non-negotiable, but it can't be just a partnership. It has to be actual operational integration and operational collaboration, not just you do this and I do that and we'll come together. It has to be in lockstep. This is a technology, and you've heard this before, that originated from the private sector. Didn't originate from a research lab supported by the government, right? So we really need to partner. There are authorities and things that we can do geopolitically as governments that private sector just can't do. But private sector, the companies, are global companies. Even the small companies are global companies at some level. So we can't do this in isolation. We have to do this together. It has to be a true collaborative approach where we discover problems and solutions together, using all of our skills and talents together. But it's just, I can't underscore enough how integrated government and the private sector must be in order to protect the whole point, which is innovation in this space, so that we do get to AGI or artificial superintelligence or whatever you want to call it. We have a common taxonomy to solve real problems.
I appreciate that. We have Jayshree Ulal, who's going to join us here, I think momentarily, if our team can pull her in. I want to ask her one of these kind of core questions that we've had a chance to chat through. And we will rely on Jackson, your good graces. Jayshree, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Good morning, everybody from California.
Good to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time. Let me jump right in with you. We're talking through trust in the AI supply chain. For you, as you think about this kind of complex set of technologies, these dependencies in your work and in the firm's work, what does trust actually mean? What is it that you have to be able to accomplish to say that something is trustworthy or could be trusted?
You know, this is a very timely topic because I don't know if you saw some of the attacks on the supply chain with one of the major software companies. I think what's changed a lot from at least my era is trust has gone from something physical that you could lock and, you know, provide what I would call explicit trust to more implicit. And what I mean by that is, you know, we're living in a world where the definition of a device is so many things. It could be your phone, your laptop, an Internet of Things, your jewelry that has some MAC address or IP address, or even an unmanaged device. So this kind of device sprawl, where often the devices are far greater than the population of the users, and one user may equal, you know, 3, 4, 5 devices, means the way you think of trust has to be very different. And you just got to assume every device is untrustworthy, and implicit trust will no more work. And you have to build the right fidelity of models. So to me, trust means, by definition, assuming it's not trustable and building layers of trust. We used to have a world where you could say, okay, I trust everything within a perimeter, but the perimeter has collapsed as well. So trust has significant defense and depth and broader implications and layers of what you have to do.
So we're hearing this system idea come up again and again through this. Let me ask all three, and I want to start with Kemba, then Jayshree will go to you and close with Sarah. Trust requires two parties, and we've talked a fair amount about what trust is in this context, but I'm curious to turn it a little bit more on whose trust we should see as most important across the AI supply chain. That is to say, as technology providers, as governments, as researchers, whose trust is it that we're seeking to earn and to keep in this supply chain? Kemba, let me start with you.
You know, my immediate answer is the user. Without the user, the AI revolution is not going to take off. If it's not safe to use, then no one's going to use it. The researcher that's going to solve the cancer problem is not going to use it. There's so many elements, though. So I would say, if there was a hierarchy, I would start with the user. It's going to be the most challenging to earn that trust. But it has to be the software developers, it has to be the cloud service providers, it has to be the water and energy providers, it has to be, et cetera, all the stakeholders. but I would start with the user.
Jayshree, what about you?
Yeah, this is a loaded question, and I think the answer you just got, definitely you need the user. But in my world in networking, it's the user, it's the devices, it's the applications, and the intersection and the danger of all of those three, which is becoming more and more difficult, particularly with co-pilots and AI agents, where people can just do so many different things with the code. So even a user doesn't know they're a dangerous user because of all the applications that they're today being exposed to. So I would say it starts with a common denominator that might be the user, but it actually ripples into a compounded problem, which has much more to do with, I would say broadly, the data. The use of data, the fidelity of data, the type of data is scary. It's very scary. And an unknown too. You're kind of approaching a set of parameters where you're trying to detect threats that you don't even know exist. And the fidelity of this data can be very multimodal. It can be structured, unstructured, applications, social media, imaging, video, search, and of course all the AI models coming up. And in that broad spectrum of consumer to supply chain to enterprise to government sector, I think protecting the data, which thereby affects the user, is really fundamental.
It's good to hear data coming back in time and time again. Sarah, curious your answer.
So I kind of want to zoom out even a little bit further and flag that often the end user of AI is actually not the person who's making a choice to use an AI system. So I would really frame it as like the person who is on the deciding end of like the use of AI. If you look at the ways that AI is being rolled out here and now today, a lot of it is like uses of AI in healthcare systems where the patient may not have the option to choose whether or not AI is integrated into an electronic health record system. Or someone who, a student in a school that doesn't have the choice whether or not it's going to be used, someone who's on the deciding end of how much their interest rate is going to be for their mortgage. AI is already being used in ways that have tremendous consequences for people's lives, but often where they are in a position of relatively limited power, and that there's another institutional entity that has comparatively more power in the choice of AI system. And so I'm really most worried about the person who's on that deciding end in a position without power that might be impacted by an AI system going wrong, making an erroneous decision, but may not know about it, may not have any ability to remedy it, and yet has to live with the consequences.
It's an interesting distinction, and maybe echoes some of Jayshree's answer, is in some ways that first important relationship is with the counterparty who's deciding to use that technology, but those ripple effects do come to users, even if they don't necessarily, to your original point, have agency in the decision to use or in the model to pick, et cetera. Let me add.
That's precisely why that's the end user is the hardest to earn their trust in the system, because they may not have the power or the agency to make the choices that are impacting them later, I think.
And reinforces that transparency point you made earlier, right? Who can I go to redress harm? Who can I understand who's responsible for this behavior? Jayshree, I want to come back to you for a second. One of the things we've been talking about today is to kind of get into people's mental models and where there might be flaws. So I want to toss you another loaded question. We're talking a lot about compute, and we have the CEO of a highly performant networking company here.
Oh, thank you.
How does that make sense? Talk me through that.
Well, let me get back to some definitions, because even the compute world has changed. Compute is when you're processing something super fast, whether it's applications or data, and it's all about speed, throughput, latency, right? Now, one of the things that's happening in the AI world through what you've probably heard of as GPUs, I think they should really call them APUs, AI accelerated processors, is the data computation is so intensive that you could spend a lot of time just going through the compute and the exchange cycles over and over again with a great deal of inefficiency. So even if you think you're transferring data at 1 terabit, you're not, because you're still in the compute loop. It's almost a do loop. So one of my most important items as the networking leader is to make sure that I can get out the compute cycles as fast as I can. And that, can't be done without a good network, because you could end up spending, $1 million on GPUs and then have a 50% inefficiency. And you're in that trap where you're just computing, but you're not getting out of it into other clusters. So to improve the utilization time of these large language models and the cycle time and what's often called the job completion time, I need to make those GPUs as efficient as possible, and that's where the network comes in, because a good network literally pays for itself and can provide the other side of that compute, because compute is how fast do you process, and network is how fast do you reach the data across your scale up, scale out, or scale across network. So I'm very focused on that, making that GPU hum much, much better and get the data out as fast as you can, rather than be trapped in a compute cycle or a fetch cycle.
So we know we're talking about a complex system. We know it's geographically distributed. And Kemba, I want to come to you on this question. One of the things that was an early part of our conversations about this project was sort of where in the world the U.S. would find good partners, markets, but also political leaders that were ready to be working on these kinds of questions of what a consensus model for trust might look like. So from your experience and the work that you've done, which market would you say is sort of best prepared to be working with the U.S. on a consensus model of trust for this supply chain? Where is the ground sort of ripest?
So this is a slightly more complicated question than it appears. So from a national security wonky perspective, the Western Hemisphere, I think, is I don't know if it's the most prepared, but it might be the most, the place to start. I think of Costa Rica in particular, because they've undergone transformative economies, right? They've gone through things. They've gone through cyber attack in real ways. They've transformed their economy. They have a great education skill set base, so in this hemisphere. But then I started thinking, a country like Estonia, it's very country specific, so the Eastern Europe space, but Estonia, where they've had experiences, they deliver digital services to their constituents regularly with a lot of adversarial pressure in their backyard. They've incorporated AI as part of their strategy, similar to how we've done it. Maybe different strategies, but sort of focused on AI innovation for defense purposes. So that's another space. And then I thought of India. So I couldn't choose which one, but it clearly is the answer. And then I thought of India, where they, again, large population center, they've contended with refreshing their economy over and over again. Fantastic talent base. They seem to have gotten further along in solving the identity issue. And identity is a whole nother layer to talk about within this AI space as devices come online. But those are the kinds of partners that I can foresee the U.S. being well positioned to collaborate with.
I appreciate that. It's diversity, to your point, size, economic focus, the degree of external threat present for all three of them. We're going to go to the room for some questions here, and I want to make sure that folks have a chance to be thinking and mulling and making sure that the questions end with a question mark, which is always a fun part of being a DC think tanker. We will have about 10 minutes. For those of you who will be in person, just raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. For those that are online, you should have access through the platform. If you could just note your name and affiliation when you ask that question. But before we go to that, I want to ask the group one more thing as we get through, I think, the last stages of this conversation. If there was, as you're looking at the year ahead, sort of one thing that gives you most confidence or concern about the level of trust that users and counterparties have in this supply chain, what would be at the top of your list as a source of confidence? What would be at the top of your list as a source of concern? Sarah, I want to start with you. Jayshree will come to you, and then to Kemba.
So the conversation that we're having about AI today is a much more robust and sort of wide-ranging conversation than we were having 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I think that the nature of the discussion of AI changed in part because now there is AI that people are able to directly engage with, and that has, I think, made it an issue that you can go home and talk about at the dinner table. And so I think that it gives me some concern, but it also gives me confidence that it's something that is, that we are ripe for a robust public conversation about the way that AI is affecting people's lives. What gives me the most concern is the very significant levels of economic and political power that has amassed within the hands of only a few firms. I think that poses many kinds of risks. There's a systemic risk if we've become too reliant on only a few companies. The Magnificent Seven firms are now, I think, a third of the stock market. And they have clearly as well tremendous political power. And so that amassing of power in the hands of a few, I think is an area that I have particular concerns about.
That's good notes. Jayshree, greatest source of confidence, greatest source of concern.
Yeah, very confident that we have, sitting in the heart of Silicon Valley, a tremendous amount of technology, by the way, that doesn't need to be concentrated in the Magnificent Seven. I think there's a whole other magnificence, that's ready to go up and not always measured in stock market or market cap. But the rate at Silicon Valley and the venture capitalist world that's disrupting sort of the traditional, I might go as far as saying classic or legacy software, is unimaginable. When the other big thing that I see, and that's confidence. I think there's lots of options. The concern would be the danger of how you apply those options. And if you've seen a lot of this already, in that a lot of these companies, should you be for profit, not for profit, do the right thing? And I think there's really got to be a do the right thing, whether you're for profit or not profit. So I'm very concerned, but at the same time encouraged that a lot of these new technologies that are enabling are looking at security without compromise. They're not just looking at speeds, innovation, but they're being responsible. The hygiene, the foundation is super important. Don't just run to be a great company with, the fantastic numbers. Be responsible in the technology you're developing. And I'm seeing that. But the concern would be, we need, when people get excited, they just start doing things and you don't see enough of that. I'd like to see that hygiene.
No, it's a great note. I mean, we've seen, the vehicles that you're talking about drive growth in product, not necessarily sort of giving that space for trust and for safety and for thinking through long-term implications. It is striking, too, I have to say, listening to this conversation, a lot of what we're talking about is an industry that's commercializing these technologies very quickly. Like, there's a research component, but Sarah, to your point, we really settled on a generation of these models and a certain set of techniques. So to what extent does the ability to move industry off of that X, thinking about, for example, Jayshree, in your world, the requirements for diffusion models as opposed to large language models, what that might look like if we say, okay, this is safer, we can make this more reliable, et cetera, in time. But Kemba, to you, greatest source of confidence, greatest source of concern.
And I've had some time now, and that's still sticky. So the greatest source of confidence is conversations like this are happening, that we are actually in a space. The blessing here is that AI has been made available to all of us now through initially ChatGPT and other sources now. So now we've had time to play with it, understand it. We're having these conversations now, so I'm quite encouraged about how do we secure it in order to make sure we innovate on it. The thing that gives me heartburn, that I will probably spend a lot of time on my next long flight reading up on, is how AI is going to impact quantum, right? We're in a technology revolution right now. AI has been made available. It is ubiquitous now, and it will continue to evolve quickly. But I feel like this is the test for when quantum comes, and it completely that's, to me, is going to be a complete disruptor. And what's the impact there? That's the piece that's on my mind.
Good. Okay, you guys have given everybody a lot to think about, worry and not. Let me go to the room for anybody that has a question. Sir, you here? Just wait for a mic. If you could just name an affiliation as well.
If you wouldn't mind, just stand up. Sure. Thank you. Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Greg. I work in government affairs for AI tech companies, especially in defense. My question is about the role of trust, geopolitical trust, especially as we talk about global supply chains. How do you view export controls and competing with national security implications how do you balance that with collaboration in tech, especially as you say we can't do this in isolation? How do you balance both? Thank you.
Anybody who wants to take that?
Yeah, I'll take it, and I'm sure there'll be many more angles. I would think you need to separate the technology from trust with the policy for trust. They're two different things. So when we get together as a country with other countries, I think we should be able to exchange all the latest and greatest and safety mechanisms for trust. But then when we start looking at individual countries and the culture, we also need to, and I think this is where, geopolitical situations need to be much more cohesive. We need to establish a policy for trust and do's and don'ts. We always tend to talk about the nuclear option for trust. Well, there are nuclear technology options. And therefore, having rules and implicit policies will be as important as the technologies themselves. So I think we could work together on the technologies, but equally important is to work together on the rules for it, because it can be pretty scary if people have different rules for trust. And I'm a strong believer, as I go back to my original statements, that today, a lot of trust on physical assets is explicit, but most of the technologies are much more implicit. And I would like the countries to work together on explicit models.
I would, yes, I agree. And from a national security point of view, we need international multimodal collaboration alliances in this space. We can't lose that. Maybe we need to develop new forms for that, but having international norms, rules, laws, I think is going to help tremendously advance AI the way that and so it can deliver the things that we expect it to deliver when we find AGI or ASI or whatever the taxonomy turns out to be. But global alliances are absolutely necessary. We have to double down on that.
I think the one other thing I might add, I was talking at the start of this panel about the importance of friction across actors. I think that in thinking about the state of play internationally, there's been a lot of emphasis on reducing friction to enable companies to roll out product faster, to try and sort of engage in an arms race. I think that reframing that to think about AI as something where we want to stage a race to the top, where there's friction that ensures that the technologies that are being produced and rolled out globally are really best in class, is a much more productive way of thinking about it than a sort of like unregulated race to the bottom, which I think is going to ultimately really diminish trust wholesale.
There's an interesting point to that too. I think that trying to achieve consensus doesn't necessarily produce value where that friction is useful, right? Where allowing different ideas to flourish, allowing that market to be a source of competitive differentiation and how markets want to adopt AI and how they'll tolerate certain kinds of risks. It's actually potentially a good driver. That behavior allows us to see what works best and what doesn't. Open to the
I
room.
think that's very well said. Countries have presidents, schools have principals. Trust needs leadership on do's and don'ts as well.
That's a good note on do's and don'ts. We'll come right here. Awesome.
Okay, sure. Hi, this is Emna Mizouni from the Jumi Group, a DC-based advisory firm. I'm so happy to see that for once somebody is talking about the end user, because we definitely are not involving that in the AI conversation. What I want to ask is actually two brief things. Do you think that it's important to add to the table of negotiation around the policy groups or entities like the African Union, the GCC, given that they are trying to be disruptive in their own ways and adopt the digital transformation and AI transformation as well? And the second thing, do you think or do you believe that opt-out from any service should be given as a right, and I highlight right, for every end user? So you mentioned the mortgage calculation, for example, that would impact somebody's life. If they opt out, would that be beneficial for them? Would that be their right? I really want to know your answers about that.
Sarah, can we start with you and then we'll come back?
Yeah, so I can tackle that last point. I think it's important to take context into consideration here. So there have been proposals, for example, like in the hiring context. If you're a job seeker and an employer is using an algorithmic system in making decisions about who to call in for an interview, well, why can't you just opt out? If you're a job seeker, you're in a position of comparatively little power in relationship to the employer. Like an opt-out also could essentially mean you're just not applying for the job. So I think in the framing of how an opt-out would be implemented, it's important not to think of it as something that it's like a user choice framework. We've seen this with cookies, for example, as well, where you just make it simple user choice without necessarily taking into context the power relationships between the user and the institution that's using the system, and that choice becomes meaningless at the end of the day. I think looking at it as a more structural issue is the best path to addressing the problem.
I would answer, yes, I would answer it a slightly different way. The end user of an energy grid cannot necessarily opt out of that. I mean, it takes some effort, but you have to be really well resourced to opt out of using the energy grid, and that's not the burden I want to put on end users. I view AI as something as ubiquitous as energy, or as you can't tell your bank to stop using the internet, right? I think there may be opportunities, just looking at it from a legal lens, around opting out of the use of your data in certain contexts. That law doesn't exist in the US right now for this context, but maybe something like that. We have to be careful to consider the end user, to put them at the center of this tech race, but we also have to be careful not to develop policies that ultimately will disadvantage the end user. So developing those coalitions, like you mentioned, in the African Union or something, those coalitions, I think maybe we need to reframe how to develop coalitions in order to be able to refocus where we place our energy in order to earn that trust, right? But it's a very good question, and it's a conversation that I hope that the Atlantic Council continues to ferret out.
Yeah. Jayshree, coming to you if you want to add to this.
No, I think much has been said. My only addition here would be, diversity actually starts with changing our habits in the core functions. So do I need side organizations? Absolutely. But I'd like that diversity of thought, diversity of action, the diversity of choices we're going to make to be in the central group rather than as an outside afterthought.
It's interesting, too, I think, as we're listening to this conversation, the time window for opt-out might well be changing. But I think the point about data ownership is strong, and it's something that we've seen sustain over multiple classes of technology, multiple generations. And so potentially coming back to that conversation, which I kind of sucked up into the Web 3.0 piece of what is your ability to assert ownership over and even potentially derive value from the data that you generate or data that your community generates as part of a sort of second wave of policymaking in this space. I will say, too, in listening to the conversation, and I appreciate everyone being here, it's clear we're at early days, right? And to your point, AI is a long-standing technology class. It's a hugely diverse umbrella of technologies and development projects. But with respect, generative AI, in this sort of last 4 years, post-ChatGPT, post-Chat Agent, post-DALL-E, we are very much in the infancy of these projects. And so I appreciate both Kemba, Sarah Meyer, and Jayshree, you joining us for a conversation to start to reframe maybe a little bit of what that second generation of policy might look like. Would encourage all of you to go out and be thinking about what's the op-ed that I can contribute into this. Call us if it's something you think might be interesting. We'd love to publish. But a big thank you to our team, especially to put this together. Thank you to the council, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Have a good rest of your afternoon, good weekend. Take care.
Thank you.